So someone did die at last, finally! In hindsight, if they were gonna kill someone, a robot or anything that could be brought back to life later on is probably the ideal choice for a show like this. So Norm, buddy, we salute you. You will be missed. Until next season when you're definitely gonna come back. We just gotta talk about the beauty that is Phineas and Ferb season 5 finale, Vendpocalypse. The musical. Yeah, I'm not too fond of the musical part, but still, I was so hoping they'd finish off the season with a half-hour special, but I was also afraid that they wouldn't even have a season finale planned at all. After all, they didn't for seasons 1 through 3. But no, they went out with a bang. This episode was a banger. It was touching and sentimental without being heavy-handed or schmaltzy. An excellent way to wrap up the season. A season which, by the way, opened with a special episode about family centered around Linda, Candace and the boys, only to pick that theme back up and revisit it with the Doofenshmirtzes. Gotta love that consistency. But let's break down the episode together. There's so much that went right, but also a few issues that I don't know if you guys have noticed, but they make the episode lose quite a few points. So let me know if you agree with the points I'm about to make or not. In the meantime, you hit the subscribinator and let's get started. Given the nature of the episode, it's only fair to start with the songs. We'll then talk about Isabella's subplot for a minute, and finally Norm's storyline. So, for a musical, the songs are pretty weak, honestly. The new Norm and Back to the Norm are perfect to, respectively, set the tone of the story, reminding the audience how Doof takes Norm for granted, and to build up the emotional climax in preparation for Norm's ultimate sacrifice, and I'm already crying. So far so good. But then you have Power Surge, which has great vocals and works as a villain song, if that's what you wanna call it. The thing is, it's not very memorable to me, neither visually nor rhythmically. It's useful story-wise to understand why Norm would flip to the vending machine side for a while, but it's quite boring to me, especially because you have this exceptional singer with you guys. Why not just go all in and give her one heck of a song? Need a Little Change is a fine song for a montage of Candace and the gang freeing everyone, and it's quite catchy too, given the more intense circumstances, but I feel like it would have been 100 times better had the boys and their friends sang it instead of extra diegetic off-screen voices. This season especially is filled to the brim with those. We don't get enough character-driven songs anymore. Hence why, out of all the episode's musical numbers, the Skip and Rock song is the absolute worst. Narratively, I guess, it makes us spend more time with high-powered rock-skipping machines, which will come in handy later, but had they appeared in the background during someone else's song, maybe, I don't know, an Isabella song about her feelings and doubts, that still would have sufficed, and it would have allowed someone else to take center stage, instead of kinda wasting a minute of screen time. And the worst part is that Candace started singing her own song right before, but she was immediately interrupted so we could get a song about skipping rocks. Nice! I mean, fine joke, I suppose, with Buford interrupting her singing, but it was so not worth it. They just ruined a cool song so we could skip to a random one sung by Love Handle. Plus, for a musical episode, it doesn't even have that many songs to begin with. I'm starting to wonder why they even called it a musical. Sorry for the negativity about such a great episode, but like, the story is its strong suit, not really the songs. Hence why calling it a musical is kinda counterproductive. For the episode, Isabella was given a little romantic subplot as Phineas touches her hand and then fist bumps her, which is the least romantic thing he could have done, yet she still takes them for signs and writes down all these unusual interactions, wondering if he might be developing feelings for her. She even writes on her notepad a deviation from the norm, tying this tiny storyline with Norm's. And it makes sense in a way, since these two want nothing more than some attention from either Doof or Phineas. Thematically, we're there, but in practice, Isabella's plotline is too marginal because it's given so little screen time, and on top of that, it doesn't really have a resolution. So for the first thing, it's mostly a screen time management issue. Given her 2 more minutes to explore her thoughts and feelings on the matter, and perhaps a song, as we mentioned before, it really would have helped the story feel like a bigger deal and not some kind of footnote in the episode, because the way it was treated, it didn't feel like a full-on story of its own. As for this storyline, storyline lacking a proper resolution. What I mean is, Candace's advice at the end doesn't quite give Isabella an answer to her questions, yet somehow that reassures her? How? I think the advice itself is great, but for Candace's character, because it shows how she smiles looking back at these childhood crushes, perhaps seeing herself in Isabella's shoes, given how up until last year she was going through something pretty similar with Jeremy, so that's really perfect. But for Isabella's character, it's kind of a non-answer. Instead of saying, I think it will probably work itself out in a couple years, which just feels like wishful thinking and nothing more, she could have said, these things work themselves out when you're older, which is an imperceptible change, but it already tells Isabella that this is not Candace giving her just a few words of encouragement like, girl, come on, yeah, it'll work out in the end, chill, but rather she's explaining that this is what happens with these childhood romances in general. In fact, I could have seen Isabella a bit more skeptical here, and instead of saying like, really? She could have been a little more doubtful, like, really? So to back up her point, Candace could have mentioned how she and Jeremy had been in each other's lives for at least a decade, and they only became a couple last year when they were mature enough. This would have given Isabella hope, but also would have gotten her to detach from this romance without getting too caught up in it and putting her life on pause waiting for a happy ending, which really would have been perfect to do some damage control given what Act 2 Rage established. It really would have made teenage Isabella a little less miserable. Even without changing anything else, just fixing this final scene really could have made the moment much more meaningful. As it is, this Isabella subplot is okay, but also pretty forgettable when you look at the full picture. But I guess it does give Finabella fans what they want, so let's let them have this. On to the main story now. The fact that vending machines actually become the dominant race makes the episode feel all the more special. It's not just a wacky concept, but it's a callback to a wacky concept, so it's a great thing they didn't waste it on a shorter episode earlier this season. Norm's quest for a sense of belonging was always a thing with him. He's pushed around and generally considered an afterthought in Doof's life, yet the show never really had time to elaborate on that. Did you forget how heartbreaking it was, and even frustrating honestly, to see Norm in the episode A Real Boy, hopeful to get the man he calls his father to pay attention to him, only for Doof to tell him Perry the Platypus's family, and he's not, calling Norm a junk pile and leaving the room. What? This robot went through so much that a regular episode wouldn't have sufficed to delve into his relationship with Doof, so it's perfect they made this the season finale. I really wouldn't have taken anything less than this personally. It is a big deal and he deserves time and proper development. Norm was always the butt of the joke, making Doof seem neglectful and pretty mean at times. That's why it felt so freaking refreshing to finally hear Heinz admit out loud that he sees and has always seen Norm as part of his family. At this point though, I really gotta hope their relationship won't regress from season 6 onwards, because any other Norm is neglected and taken for granted joke would just feel so wrong after this. They even had one of those jokes in the previous episode, so I hope they got it all out of their system now. What stood out here especially was that wholesome flashback of a lonely post-divorce Doofenshmirtz building Norm to cope as he tries to bounce back and figure out his next move. I really love how they made Norm the product of Doof's darkest hour, or one of his many darkest hours technically, and to think that we were already given a flashback of Doof moving into the building after the divorce, but it was all done in a more lighthearted way that I didn't really think it would have that many layers. While here we see those same circumstances from a different angle, one I personally never really thought too much about, and I love how they can still surprise me. This is a phase of his life I want to know so much more about now. Still, the thing is, this flashback could have been perfect had it not been for its glaring continuity issues. Maybe you didn't notice, or don't even care, that's fair, but it got me so confused on my first watch through. The flashback establishes that Doof built Norm as soon as he moved into his current building, right after his divorce, aka about 13 to 12 years ago. But this is a huge retcon, because when Norm was introduced to the show all the way back in season 1's episode Grease Lightning, Doof said, and I quote, "Recoil in horror at my new creation, a giant killer robot." Man, And let me emphasize the words new creation, because that's what Norm was meant to be. He clearly didn't exist in universe before that episode. Now, because I want this emotional moment to work, we can collectively agree right here, right now, that when Doof talked about his new creation, he wasn't referring to Norm himself, but rather the brand new program that turned him into a killer robot and a platypus hunter specifically. After all, right after this appearance, Norm was never this hostile towards Perry. Of course, that's just due to him becoming a character of his own and all, but we can sweep this under the rug and explain this issue away like this. I'll gladly turn a blind eye to this because I really love this moment. What's harder to explain is the fact that as Dr. D moved into his penthouse, he had a Mary McGuffin doll with him. And do you remember that doll? It's the one Doof has been searching for years and finally bought at the Flynn Fletcher yard sale last summer so he could give it to Vanessa. It's a nice callback, but it makes absolutely no sense for him to have it a decade ago. It's like the writers remember the doll existed, but not the context around it. The point was that Doof had been looking for one of those dolls for 9 years before giving it to Vanessa. But now you tell me that he had the doll all along? Again, we can explain it away, saying it was a knockoff doll perhaps, and what Vanessa wanted was the real thing, or maybe she had it and then lost it when she was 7, and Doof tried to find her a new one ever since. Really, we can pretend a bunch of stuff happened off screen and we can make all of this make sense, but it was weird. Unlike the inconsistency with Norm's creation though, this mistake was pretty easy to avoid, just don't show the doll, especially if you don't have the chance to provide or hint at an explanation for it. Having a retcon and an easy to avoid inconsistency all in the same scene just feels a little jarring. The very best moment of the episode, of course, is Norm's sacrifice. Given how the stakes were pretty high, with the vending machines being self-aware and self-replicating, there was no easy way to stop them, making Norm's decision of blowing himself up and the other machines alongside him pretty much the only solution. That scene was perfect! Norm takes this decision and isn't budging. Perry, wasting no time, salutes him, thanking him for his brave decision. Vanessa is in denial, trying to convince him to change his mind, and Doof tears up at this gesture, helping him save them all. Norm finally takes a good look at his little photo right before leaving this world, and they even remembered about Squeaky and saved him. Not to mention the background music, it just made the moment all the more powerful. It's wholesome, but without being cheesy. It's perfect. This is undoubtedly the most emotional moment from the show, at least for me, but tell me if you agree or not. It even beats Ballooney's death. Yes, it beats Ballooney's death 100%. In fact, about that, do you guys remember when in my video on Phineas and Ferb's saddest moments, I mentioned Robot Candace's death as she sacrificed herself to save real Candace, and then I was like, imagine if Norm gave his life to save Heinz. And that's exactly what he did. Personally, nothing moves me like a well-executed self-sacrifice scene. It's a masterful display of what the show still has to offer. I told you guys this revival was worth it. I told you I wasn't crazy. I told you! It really is one heck of an episode. Even despite all those possible improvements I mentioned, it's beautiful. I'm not saying it's in my top 10 favorite episodes from the show, but it might be and I'm just not telling you. I should do a top 10 with my favorite episodes someday. You might find this one in there. Finally, on the reference department, I wanted to mention a few things, because despite those two inconsistencies in the flashback, Vendpocalypse gave us a few gems here, like the vending machines guard selling tough gum, which is also pretty in character for them, and Baljeet saying, "There is candy in me," when pretending to be a vending machine. And we even got a few references to this season as well, which really helps make it feel even more consistent, like the seesaw joke again, the prototypes of Doof's fork it over and give a man a fishinator, plus him, Vanessa and Norm admiring the Tri-State Aurora from 10 years ago. Also, one final thing I appreciated was the joke of Norm being between 7 and 22 feet tall, depending on who draws him, which is just perfect. Overall, I love this season finale. It proves the show didn't lose its heart, and it's still willing to explore a more mature territory. You really must let me know your thoughts on the episode and also your theories as to what might happen next season with Norm, because he is coming back, no doubt, but I imagine we'll get a follow-up episode where Doof will struggle to find the last few missing Norm pieces. I fear and I imagine we're not gonna get a touching and sentimental story like this one, but it's fine really. I do hope, however, Norm is not just coming back suddenly without even a few minutes of build-up for at least an episode. By the end of which, my heart would literally melt if they had Doof call Norm son and even go play a game of catch together. With that being said, I thank you all so much for watching. Let me warn you, I will be doing, and this is a threat, I will be doing a breakdown of the entire season, and maybe I'll be ranking the episodes of the season's second half as well, since we already did it with the first one. Once more, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Ciao!